Hello, welcome to my podcast on what kids need. And today I want to talk about hitting, shoving, pushing, pinching, all those things. Please don't hit your kids. It's not going to work, and they're just going to get to be really angry with you and become really anxious around you. So I'm doing this podcast probably to ask you that if you have been hitting your kids, shoving them, pushing them, pinching them, smacking them, I want you to stop, because you're actually doing damage to this child. When we hit children, we scare them. That's what really happens. We scare them, we make them anxious, and they become scared of us. They might not show that, but they do, and they don't feel safe at home anymore. They also really get angry with us, and that's just not going to be any good for our long-term relationship or even short-term relationship with them. So children do two things: become anxious and scared, and become angry with us and get to hate us. You don't need to hit children. You don't need to push them, shove them. You can discipline your child without hitting them. And you can't be two-faced. You can't be running around saying, don't hit your sister and don't hit the dog and stop poking your brother, and then you do it. It's completely irrational, and it sends completely double messages and confusing messages to your children. So how can you say that it's okay for you to hit them, but it's not okay for them to hit other people? And how can you just in your mind think that? If you've been thinking this way because you were brought up this way, maybe challenge yourself and just stop doing it. There's no reason to hit a child. Sometimes we might need to restrain a child. If they're getting out of control, you have to hold them from hurting themselves or hurting other people, but you don't actually have to hit them. And by holding them, it's sort of like a good thing in a sense, when you hold them and you let them calm down. Children are, by their very nature, quite volatile. They're quite passionate little beings because they haven't learned all the social norms, and so that's why they need to feel in a safe environment while they learn the social norms. I've seen people at shopping centres lash out at their kids. I've seen them hit them across the face. I've seen people just shove and nudge and hit their children. And the other thing that I've noticed parents do is they deny they did it. So you watch this person hit the child or shove the child, and the child gets upset, starts to cry or whatever, and then the parent says, what did I do? And they're like, you just pushed me. Oh, well, that was nothing. And there's a lot of deniability with the hitting as well, and that's your stuff. If you've come out of a household where there was hitting and punishment in this form and physical abuse, it would be very easy to just keep doing it. And that's why you need to really take a handle on yourself and stop it, because the next generation will just continue the abuse. And I don't care what anyone says about they deserve a smack and put them in line. It's all crap. No child needs to be hit. If you're in the kitchen and your husband or partner is there and you don't wash the dish properly and they turn around and just hit you, that's called domestic violence. Like, you can actually, if it continues, you can actually get them in jail. But you can do the same thing to your children, and unless someone reports you, you just keep doing it. I feel that our society has grown, and we've learnt lots of lessons from our parents and grandparents of how not to do things and things that don't really work. You're better off to talk to your children. When they've calmed down, you talk to them and you explain. You do the discipline thing. I'm going to explain to you what you did and why you can't do it and what are the outcomes and what are better choices that we could have made. What could you have done that would have been better than hit your sister or, get the stick and hit the dog. You have to teach them not to hit and not to use any physical violence against another being. And that's what you're there to do. You're there to model good behaviour. So you can't be hitting your kids and saying it's okay because you're a parent and then expect them not to hit. They will do what you do. And that's the sad thing about it, that the abuse continues down the line. People tend not to want to use that word abuse. They want to use it for when you basically bash someone up and end up perhaps in the hospital. But abuse is still abuse when you hit. When you hit someone, it's still being abusive. It doesn't matter how you want to frame it, it's still abuse. And if there's physical abuse in your household, you need to stop it. Talk to the father or the mother as well, and just decide to stop doing it. Now, you can't be a good role model and tell your children not to hit others when you're hitting them, or even each other, or the dog or the cat. You've got to be the role model. You have to be the one who controls your temper, controls your anger, and channels it into something else more positive. That's what you're there to teach them, how to handle their anger. What you're teaching them is to handle your anger, you just have to hit somebody, or shove them and push them, or belt them, or pinch them. That's what you're actually teaching them. So all those words you're saying about, don't hit your sister, it's all rubbish, because you're just teaching them what to do when they have an angry situation, or they get upset, or they're disappointed, or they don't get their own way. And so you're actually teaching the opposite of what you're trying to teach them. In our society, people are hitting each other less and less, but in other ways, I think they're hitting each other more and more, because they're doing it behind closed doors, because it's not socially acceptable. In the olden days it was. You'd be sitting at the kitchen table. If you said something wrong, your father could just hit you off the chair and no one would say anything, and it would be okay. Today, if you try to do that at a dinner party, people would scowl at you, because we've moved on from hitting our kids and washing their mouth out. So we've sort of moved on from some of those old antiquated things. Didn't really help. It just made the child really angry and hate us. Work towards getting rid of it in your family. I think you should have a little family meeting when you say, from now on, we are going to have no hitting in this house. Mothers and fathers and children, no hitting. And that's the beginning and the end of it. We will no longer be hitting in this house. Nobody. Then the house becomes a safe area. You have to give your children other options, like if the sister's driving them nuts and she won't give them the scissors back or something, or she's just smashed their Lego, then you need to come in and do some disciplining around that, so it doesn't escalate into a physical fight. And sometimes you need to separate the children just so that they don't get into a physical fight, because children have strong temper sometimes and it needs to be harnessed. I know I go against a lot of society because people are still hitting their kids. You can see it everywhere, and I know behind closed doors it's still happening, and it's not really something that our society has yet tackled. There are a lot of things you're not supposed to do to children, but when I went looking here in Australia, you can still give them a smack and hit them, and I'm like, I think that's not good, because a smack can turn into a lot of other things. And that's the trouble with it too. If you're angry with them, they're angry with you. It can escalate as soon as you involve any physical violence, and then children can be more easily hurt because they're smaller. And some parents have put their kids in hospital because they hit them or pushed them and they broke arms or legs, or hit their head on the sideboard. So it's not really a good thing to do, because it can escalate. And the thing is too, that once you start hitting a child, it becomes more easy to do that. You need to control yourself in this area, because you're going to damage your children, and then they're going to damage their children, and then they're going to damage their children. It's a cycle of abuse, and it really isn't a good method. It doesn't have any real good outcomes. It might feel good at the time for you to hit them, to get release and vent your anger, but long term, your kids are going to absolutely hate you and be angry and not like you, and definitely not trust you. And they get like they are in a war zone all the time. They never know when you're going to turn around and hit them, and that makes them feel very anxious. And that's why a lot of children who get hit at home, pushed around, they're very anxious children, very stressed children. You can see it in their face. They're always watching where mum and dad are and what's happening, because at any moment they could get a hiding. It's not a good thing to do. Try and stop it if you've been doing it. Have a family talk and decide you're all going to stop doing it. It's really, really important. You can still have some outcomes if you hit people. You can decide what they'll be in your family, but make sure they're not physical violence, because violating a person physically and getting into their close to them and hurting them is a really bad thing to do to people, and it stays with them. That's the trouble. you will remember when you hit. I remember my mother had a bamboo duster. She had it down the side of the fridge, and she'd go there and she'd rustle it and she'd bring out this damn duster and she'd hit you with it, and it was really stung, like it really, really hurt, like it really stung because it was bamboo, and it would leave these welts on me. And she just, when she lost her temper, she just like hit you all over the place. You could end up being hit in the head, in the face, whatever. So, the hitting can be really, really dangerous as well for a child on a physical level because they're so much smaller and your force is so much greater. This is what this week's little talk about what kids need, and it's to be in a safe zone where they're not hit in any way. So think about it. If you've been doing it, please stop doing it. And I think that it's easier to explain to a child that you have a no hitting zone when everyone isn't hitting than when you give them the confusion of we have a no hitting zone except when I feel like hitting you or the dog or your sister or even your partner, like your mum or your dad. So you can't be hypocritical like this. You've got to have, stand up for what is right and keep your children feeling safe. So I'm sending you lots of love and healing. And sometimes, when these children are really upset, they actually need a hug. They need to be held. They need to be consoled. That's what's really happening. And so I think a hug is much better than hitting.